Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marc Crawford, and today I'm going to be talking about my experience building vSAN with certified components. And I just want to thank you for taking your time out of the busy day and coming and attending my session. So the agenda for my presentation is I'm going to talk a little bit about me, why I chose vSAN, the preparation that I did for building my vSAN, some lessons learned, and then we'll have wrap up and Q&A. So a little bit about me. I'm a senior systems engineer at NJBC. I worked there for about 7 years. I've got 20 plus years in the IT industry. I was in the Air Force for 10 years. I'm the St. Louis VMUG leader. I've done that for a little over 4 years. 4 times vExpert. This is my 7th year at VMworld. I have a whole bunch of certifications. The first certification I received was back in 1998. That was my MCP. I have 3 patents. I'm not going to talk about those today, but you can check those out on my LinkedIn page if you want. And I'm very active on Twitter if you want to get a hold of me. So why did I choose vSAN? Well, I work on government projects, and I work in an environment, we have a lot of software development going on, and about 95% of our environment was on government-funded equipment. And we lost a government contract that we had, and we had to turn that equipment back in. And so we had to come up with a solution to move all of our VMs and all of our data off all the government equipment that we had onto something that was commercial. And so we started coming up with ideas. And so when my boss told me that we had to basically turn all this stuff back in and come up with a plan, I went to his office, and he's like, oh, everything's fine, we'll get this taken care of, no problem. But in reality, it wasn't quite that simple, so we had to sit down and discuss a lot of things. And obviously, here's the main things that we had to discuss. We had to discuss what our budget was, what our actual requirements were, what constraints that we had, and what risks we wanted to accept. So there was a lot of discussion going on before we even went out and decided what we were actually going to do. So even maybe not using vSAN was also another discussion if there was another solution besides that. So there was a lot of discussion going on before we actually finally decided that we were going to use vSAN. So let me just back up just a second. So part of the reason why I chose vSAN was then because we actually had quite a bit of other equipment that was not government funded equipment. We had a whole bunch of servers, they had RAM and a whole bunch of RAM in there already. So that helped us make the decision on why we chose vSAN already, because we didn't have to run out and buy a whole bunch of hardware. We only had to go out and buy a little bit of hardware. So that made the decision a little bit easier for us. So once we figured out that we were going to do vSAN, one of the things that we first looked at was the licensing, because obviously depending on what you want to do with vSAN is going to depend on what license you need. So if we wanted to do something like stretch cluster, we're obviously going to need an enterprise license. If we wanted to do a RAID 5, RAID 6 erasure encoding, we would need at least advanced licensing. We already had quite a few vSAN licenses, but unfortunately we only had standard licenses. And it would have been really nice for us to be able to do erasure coding, but we got a quote to upgrade our licenses to advanced or enterprise, and we just really couldn't fit that into the budget. It was hard for us to justify upgrading our licenses. So we made the decision to just go ahead and stick with standard, and then maybe someday down the road we could upgrade to advanced or enterprise. And so the next thing in my preparation that we did before we actually started buying any hardware, we made sure that the servers that we had were on the HCL, and then everything that we were going to buy in the HCL. So my initial thought was, oh, if it's compatible with the ESXi host, we should all be good. Well, unfortunately with vSAN, that's not true. There are things that are compatible in ESXi in your host that are actually not compatible with vSAN. So the first thing you need to do is go to the HCL, and then once you're in the HCL, there's a drop-down link for you to actually go to for vSAN components. And then once you're in there, this initially takes you to a page that's going to help you build all these vSAN ready nodes. Well, we didn't have the budget to build a vSAN ready node. We couldn't just go out and buy something that's pre-configured and pre-built. We're actually building our own based on components that we buy separately. So if you're doing that solution, you have to go down to step 3, where it says build your own base certified components. I don't know why they make that so hidden down there, because it took me a while to actually find that, but if you're building your own solution, that's where you need to go. Another quick thing to talk about is also right below that is the sizing and TCO calculator. If you once you figure out how much data that you need to migrate, or if this is a new deployment, that is a very good link to go and figure out based on how much data you think you're going to have, or how much data you're going to have on the vSAN. That will help you calculate how many disks you need to buy, what size dish you need to buy, and that type of information. And actually later on today, there's a good workshop going on, sizing workshop. So if you're interested in that, that'd be a good one to attend. So once you're in the vSAN compatibility guide, if you look over in that green arrow there, there's the 3 main things that you need to make sure that are compatible with vSAN. So you got your hard disk controllers, your hard drives, and SSDs. So once we started researching which controllers, SSDs, and hard drives that we were going to put in our servers, then we made sure that they were all on the compatible vSAN list. So we had Dell R720s laying around. Luckily, they already had 512 gig of RAM in them. And so I verified that they were on the vSAN list and they were compatible. So we were all good with all of our hosts. We didn't have to run out and buy any servers. So we were good with all of that. Then I talked with my local VMware rep and tried to discuss which different controller we wanted to use, because the controller that was in the R720s was not compatible with vSAN. So we had to go out and buy new controllers. And we did a lot of discussion. We talked with Dell, we talked with VMware. There were some Dell controllers that they wanted us to buy, but Dell told us that they weren't compatible in the R720s. So luckily we found this MegaRAID 9361 8i controller. And the biggest thing when you look at a controller that you're going to use in vSAN, you got to make sure the queue depth is correct, and you got to make sure that it supports JBOD. Those are the 2 biggest things. And so we found one that worked in our servers and then met those 2 requirements. So, and it wasn't too expensive either. So we were able to get enough of those for each of the servers. And then the next thing you have to make sure is, I didn't know this before we started building this, you actually got to make sure all your hard drives and SSDs are on the vSAN compatibility list. So after a lot of discussion with my VMware rep and our Dell rep, we decided to use these 2 different Samsung models. We chose an all-flash array, and these are actually only SATA drives. We wish we could have got SAS drives, but they're a little bit more expensive. We couldn't fit that in our budget. So luckily, these drives were still able to give us the IOPS that we needed. And so one of the 480 drive is our cache drive, and then the 960 drive is our data drives. So we had we chose our RAID controller and our SSDs and ordered everything, and we once we got it all in, we threw it all together, and we thought we were all ready to go, and we started building it, loading ESXi on it, and got it up and good to go. And on the cluster, I enabled vSAN part. Everything showed up in the disk management part, and so I thought, oh, I'm all good. I should be ready to go and just create my disk groups and then create the cluster. Well, that's really not the first step that you should be going to for vSAN. Even though it's solid and everything, there's some steps that you should do before you get too happy and go with all that. What you really want to look at is go to the cluster level and go to configure and configure assistant. And on the right-hand side, you want to make sure that all of those are green right there. I should have took a screenshot before I made all these greens, but before this, a lot of these steps were not green. and I had to go back and fix all those component parts. Mainly what it's checking for is to make sure all your hardware is good, all the drivers are good, all of the firmware and everything is all compatible. That's really what a lot of checks going on here. And then down in the cluster part, it's making sure DRS is all good, and HA and all that. And then it's also checking your network cards, making sure you got 10 gig connectivity between all your hosts, and the vSAN part is enabled between all that network. So you really want to make sure all of this is green before you start doing anything else. And then there's one more health check that you want to check before you actually start doing anything else. So if you go up to the cluster level again, and then click on the vSAN tab at the top, and then click on health, all of those on the right-hand side need to be green. And so once we had everything fixed and everything green, at this point, we should have done a lot of performance testing, made sure everything was good, but because we didn't have a whole lot of time to migrate all of our data off of our old equipment, I wasn't able to do as much performance testing and validation testing as I really wanted to. And so we were really lucky that we were just able to start getting everything working. So here's one more performance check. If you go back to that configure tab, there's a health and performance, and then right here down where that health that says green, that's another part that you want to make sure that's green before you start doing everything. So luckily vSAN does a lot of health checks and configuration checks that let you know that everything is ready before you start moving any data or start using it. And so there in 6.5 version, it does a lot of good health checks. And so yeah, before we started doing any data, I would have liked to have done this performance diagnostic test, but unfortunately I just didn't have the time because I knew I had so much data to migrate off my old one onto the vSAN that there wasn't enough time to do it. But if there was time, I would really like to have done this part. And so once we started actually moving a lot of data from we had a UCS cluster. Once we started moving all the data from the UCS cluster onto the vSAN, when we went back and looked at the health, it would have showed us these two yellow triangles up there. And basically what it was saying was that the disks were out of balance. There was some data that was on some hosts, then that was not on others, so it was just rebalancing it, and it just took a little time for it to balance that out. But because we were migrating so much data at one time, it took a little while for it to do that. So if you come into health and you see that, that's the reason why. And if you look at down to the bottom down there, it will tell you what data is actually moving, what host, and you can even drill down in there farther to tell you how long it's going to take it. So even though it showed yellow up there, it's nothing really a whole lot to worry about, just something to keep an eye on. And so here's where I drilled down a little bit farther. It was telling me how long it's going to take, what data is actually being balanced onto what host. And so yeah, we've had it up for a little while now. I would say about 3, maybe 4 months now, and we've actually added more disks to the cluster. We have about 30 terabytes of an all-flash array, and we have all types of workloads on it. We have SQL, servers. We don't have an Exchange on it because we're using Office 365, but yeah, we have a software development shop, so we have a lot of software development going on there, and we've been extremely happy with everything that we're doing. Any questions? I'm sorry, what's that? So yeah. So we only have one disk group, and we are because of the licensing, we're using the RAID 0, and that's the only thing that will allow us, and that was a risk we accepted, and so. Yeah, because the license that we have, that's a risk that we had to accept. But yeah, I mean, but that one of the benefits of doing that is supposedly it gives us more performance. So it's a trade-off that we had to have. So, yeah. Latency? Yeah, we really haven't seen hardly any latency at all. Luckily, our IOP workload is not that high. We're not a huge shop. We probably have around 30 developers, and so we don't have a lot of like large production workloads. But yeah, usually under the 4 or 5 millisecond latency range. No, yeah. Luckily, before we actually started the migration, about a year before the migration, I thought we might have been in this situation, and so I had already started doing a lot of consolidation to the UCS cluster. And even before that, though, we'd never allowed RDMs, and so luckily we didn't have any requirements that people forced us to do it. So we didn't have any that type of stuff. So it was pretty much an easy migration. Yeah. I'm sorry, what's that? Yeah, we have an all 10 gig network, so we didn't have to buy any Cisco switches or any. Yeah, we have all Cisco Nexus switches, and yep, 10 gig, 5K switches. Yep, and we had some Broadcom NICs that are in the servers already, so we didn't have to buy any NICs. Yep. Yeah, so if you look back on the first slide, yeah, see those drives right there? Yeah, over here. So yeah, that's how we're doing it all. So I think right now each of them have actually 8 drives in them, because we've added a little bit more as time has gone on. We've been able to spend more money and buy a little bit more. I'm sorry, I can't hear good. Yeah, we have a VLAN just for vSAN. No, we have a dedicated NIC just for vSAN. Yeah, and then we have its own VLAN also. So yeah, each server has 2 10 gig cards in it. Any other questions? Yeah, so we are using a product called Quest vRanger. It used to be owned by Dell, but then they sold it, and now it's owned by Quest. It was originally a Quest product, and then they sold it. Dell bought it, and then after the merger, Dell sold it back to Quest. So we're using Quest vRanger. It does okay. It's not the best product in the world, but it works. Any other questions? All right, I want to thank everybody for attending my session.